The smoke had not yet cleared from the ruins of Rithis 7. The air was filled with the smell of burned metal and dust that refused to settle. Captain Daniel Hayes moved slowly through the wreckage, his armor scratched, and his boots leaving deep prints in the ash. The battle had ended only a few hours ago, but the silence that followed felt heavier than the war itself. Daniel was a medic from the Human Expeditionary Fleet. His mission was simple: search for survivors, no matter which side they were on. Humanity's code demanded that anyone who still breathed deserved a chance to live. But that rule was easier to follow on paper than on a real battlefield. He passed a collapsed structure that might once have been a research tower. Pieces of it still flickered with dying blue light. The ground was cracked and scorched. His scanner beeped faintly, a weak life signal ahead. Daniel's heart quickened. Most readings turned out to be dying drones or flickering circuits. But this one pulsed differently. He climbed over a ridge of shattered concrete. The ruins opened into what looked like a small courtyard half buried in sand. That was when he heard a sound so soft he thought it might be the wind. Then it came again, shaky, broken words and accented English. "Please, don't hurt me." Daniel froze. His helmet sensors adjusted, narrowing on the sound. Beneath a fallen wall, tangled in steel beams, something moved. He stepped closer, lowering his rifle. "Hello," he called carefully. "I'm not going to hurt you," a weak whimper answered him. Then a figure became visible under the rubble. It was a girl no older than 20 in human years. Her silver-gray skin marked with strange blue veins that glowed faintly under the dust. Her eyes, large and amber, looked up at him, full of terror. She tried to crawl backward, but her legs were pinned beneath the broken wall. "Please," she whispered again. "I can't walk." Daniel's training kicked in. He slung his rifle behind his back, knelt beside the wreckage, and began assessing her injuries. 2 fractures at least, maybe more. The bones were thin, delicate compared to a human's. He pulled out his portable stabilizer and spoke softly. "It's okay. I'm a medic. I'm going to get you out." The girl shook her head weakly. "Humans kill the wounded. My people said that." Daniel paused. He had heard the same lies from human soldiers about the alien races they fought. "Not today," he said. "I'm not here to kill anyone." Carefully, he lifted one beam after another. Each movement drew a pained cry from her lips. He stopped often, letting her breathe, making sure nothing crushed her further. When at last he freed her legs, she lay trembling in the dust, too weak to move. Daniel spread his emergency blanket on the ground and rolled her onto it. She weighed almost nothing. "You're going to be fine," he murmured. He tapped his wristband to send a silent beacon for medical pickup, but the signal was jammed. Static hissed through his cums. The battle had wrecked every relay in this sector. They were alone. He carried her to a sheltered spot near the ruins of a small dome and set up a thermal lamp. Night was falling fast. The twin moons of Rithis began to rise, pale and cold, over the shattered city. The girl's breathing slowed. "Why, help me?" she asked faintly. "You are human. I am from the Viren Empire. We fought you." Daniel removed his helmet, letting her see his face, tired, dust-covered, but calm. "Because you're hurt," he said simply. "That's reason enough." She stared at him as if he had spoken something impossible. Hours passed. Daniel built a small fire from broken furniture and powered it with a portable cell. He heated a ration pack and poured a little water into a cup. The alien girl lay wrapped in the blanket, her silver hair spread like threads of light across the sand. She watched him quietly, still afraid to move. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lyra," she whispered. "Daughter of the scholar Vera. But she is gone now." "I'm Daniel," he said. "Manek, 3rd Division. Human Fleet." Lyra blinked slowly. "You sound peaceful. But your people, they burned our skies." Daniel looked into the flames. "Maybe we did. War makes monsters of everyone." The words hung in the air. Neither spoke for a while. Later that night, as the wind howled outside, Daniel inspected her legs. They were swollen and bruised. He applied his nano-bandages' thin films, that shimmered as they adjusted to her skin's alien pattern. She winced, but didn't pull away. He spoke softly to distract her. My mother used to say, every world deserves a sunrise. No one should die in the dark. Lyra glanced up. Your mother was wise. Daniel smiled faintly. She was. She believed people could be better than the wars they fought. A small silence followed, filled only by the sound of crackling fire. By morning, the storm had passed. The desert shimmered under pale light. Daniel checked his beacon against till nothing. He needed to reach the fleet, but he couldn't leave her. Lyra's legs were still too weak to stand. He made a makeshift stretcher from carbon rods and the blanket, securing her gently. She watched him work with quiet eyes, then said, Your hands. They do not shake like a killer's. He looked at her. Maybe because I've had enough killing. They moved slowly across the wasteland, Daniel pulling the stretcher behind him. The city had turned to a graveyard of glass. Along the way they passed broken machines, some human, some Viren. Each told the same story of loss. Once, a drone buzzed overhead. Daniel froze and pulled Lyra under a collapsed overhang. The drone scanned the area, then flew off. Lyra trembled, whispering they hunt survivors. I know, Daniel said. That's why we keep moving. After hours of walking, he found a half-intact structure, a communication outpost partly buried in sand. Inside, they found shelter from the wind. He placed her on a bed of old fabric and looked around. Most systems were dead, but a few still sparked with low power. Maybe enough to fix the beacon. While he worked, Lyra watched him. Your people are strong, she said softly. You fight even when the world breaks. He didn't look up. Strength doesn't mean much without kindness. That made her pause. She looked down at her thin hands. We were told humans feel no mercy, that you take worlds because you like to rule. Daniel chuckled under his breath. That's what they tell us about you, too. Their eyes met for a brief moment, two enemies, suddenly unsure what that word even meant. When night returned, the cold bit harder than before. Daniel wrapped his jacket around Lyra and sat nearby. His breath came out in small clouds. She whispered, You could leave me. Why stay? He answered without hesitation. Because if I leave, I become everything your people said I was. That silence between them grew softer, almost peaceful. She turned her face toward the firelight. Your world, Earth, is it beautiful? He smiled a little. Sometimes, blue oceans, green forests. We fight to protect it, but sometimes I think we forget what that means. I would like to see it, she said quietly. He looked at her, seeing not an enemy, but a living being who longed for home, for peace. Maybe one day, he said. By the third day, Daniel's rations were almost gone. The storm season on Rithus was beginning again, and the air smelled of more dust. His beacon still flickered with no reply. He began to fear the fleet had withdrawn. That night, he found Lyra crying quietly. She turned her face away when he noticed. I slowed you down, she said. You should have left me. Daniel shook his head. If I start leaving people behind, then I stop being human. She stared at him for a long moment. Human, she repeated softly, as if testing the word. My people used that word to frighten children. But you. She hesitated. You are not like the stories. He didn't know what to say, so he simply gave her the last of his water. She accepted it, hands trembling. At dawn, the sound of engines echoed faintly in the sky-human rescue craft. Daniel stood and fired a flare. Lyra tried to rise but couldn't. They will kill me, she said, panic filling her voice. Daniel knelt beside her. They won't. I'll make sure of it. As the shuttle descended, kicking up dust and sand, Daniel placed himself between her and the incoming soldiers. They were his people, but he had already made his choice. The first officer who stepped out saw the wounded alien and reached for his weapon. Daniel raised a hand sharply. She's under my protection, he said firmly. The officer frowned. That's the enemy. No, Daniel said, his voice steady. That's a patient. The wind howled around them. For a moment no one moved. Then the officer lowered his weapon and nodded toward the shuttle. "Get her aboard, Captain." "We'll take her to the medbay." Daniel lifted Lyra gently. She looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "Why? Why are you doing this?" He smiled faintly. "Because someone has to start ending this war." The shuttle door closed behind them. The engines roared, carrying them up through the dust and into the pale sky of Rithis the Seventh. For the first time, Lyra let her eyes close without fear, and Daniel sat beside her, wondering if mercy could really change the stars. The shuttle rose through the brown clouds of Rithis 7 and broke into the thin blue above. Inside, the cabin lights flickered as the engines stabilized. Daniel sat beside Lyra on a narrow bench, his armor dusty, his face streaked with exhaustion. The alien girl lay still, wrapped in a silver blanket that shimmered faintly in the sterile light. Her breathing was uneven, but she was alive. The metaphyser came forward, holding a scanner. "She's stable enough for transport," he said, glancing at Daniel. "You sure about this, Captain? Command won't like bringing a Viren on board." Daniel looked straight ahead. "Then they can take it up with me. She's under my protection." The officer hesitated, then nodded and walked back. The engines roared louder as the shuttle cut through the upper atmosphere toward the waiting human fleet, a string of steel giants glinting against the stars. Lyra opened her eyes slowly. "Where are you taking me?" "To the med station," Daniel answered. "They'll fix your legs properly." She turned her head weakly. "And after that?" Daniel paused. "After that? We'll see." Her eyes filled with worry. "Your people. They will not like me." He gave a faint smile. "They don't have to. They just have to see you as I do someone worth saving." When they docked at Orbital Station Helios, a bright ringed facility above the scarred world, soldiers and medbots waited at the airlock. The atmosphere shifted. Curious stares followed them as Daniel carried Lyra through the narrow corridors. The crew had seen aliens before, but never one treated gently by a human officer. Dr. Renee Marlowe, S Station's chief medic, met them near the infirmary doors. "Captain Hayes," she greeted, her eyes flicking to the alien girl. "You've caused quite the signal storm. Fleet Command wants a report." "We'll have it," Daniel said calmly. "After she's safe." Renee scanned Lyra quickly. Severe trauma to the lower limbs, malnutrition, dehydration. She gestured toward a sterile chamber. "Get her into MedPod 3. As the machines hummed to life, Lyra looked frightened by the bright lights and cold metal arms. Daniel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's okay," he said softly. "They're here to heal you, not harm you." She stared up at him. "You promise?" "I promise." The pod sealed around her, filling with soft blue light. For the next hour, Daniel stood nearby, watching as nanofibers repaired her damaged bones and tissue. When the procedure ended, Lyra lay still, her breathing steady. The machines powered down, and the glass dome slid open. She blinked, confused. "It doesn't hurt anymore," she whispered. Renee smiled gently. "Then it worked." Lyra turned to Daniel. "You kept your word," he nodded. "Always." News spread quickly across the fleet. Some admired Daniel's decision. Others called it reckless. In the mess hall, whispers followed him. "Did you hear? Hayes brought a Viren girl aboard. Must have lost his mind. Those creatures killed our pilots on Acera. He's got courage." He spent most of his time in the med bay, checking on Lyra's progress. She was learning to walk again, slowly, supported by light frame crutches. The staff began to notice her quiet manners, the way she thanked every nurse, the way she listened more than she spoke. One evening, Daniel found her sitting by the viewport, gazing at the stars. Her silver hair caught the light, and her eyes reflected the endless black beyond. "You should rest," he said, stepping closer. "I like watching the stars," she replied softly. "They used to scare me. I thought humans came from them to destroy us." He stood beside her. "We came from one small blue world. The stars just happened to be in the way." Lyra tilted her head. "Do you miss it? Your world?" "Every day," Daniel said. "Earth smells like rain and soil." "You'd like it." She smiled faintly. Maybe one day I'll see it. He looked at her, surprised at the hope in her voice. Maybe you will. Days passed into weeks. Lyra's strength returned, and so did her laughter, soft at first, then brighter. The nurses began to talk less about the alien patient and more about the girl in Bay 3. But not everyone approved. Commander Voss, a tall officer with sharp eyes, called Daniel into his office. Captain Hayes, I've read your report, Voss said, tapping a tablet. You directly violated Engagement Protocol 7 by aiding an enemy combatant. With respect, sir, the battle was over. She was no threat. That's not the point, Voss replied. You've created a political complication. The Viren Empire still considers us at war. Command fears they'll see this as espionage, and let them see compassion for once, Daniel said firmly. Voss frowned. You think compassion wins wars? Daniel met his gaze. No, but it ends them. The commander stared at him for a long moment before sighing. You always were stubborn, Hayes. Fine. Keep her under observation. But if command decides otherwise, she'll be transferred. Understood? Yes, sir. As Daniel left the room, his thoughts burned. He knew what transferred meant: interrogation, maybe worse. He couldn't let that happen. That night, alarms echoed faintly through the corridors. Lyra woke in panic, her heart racing at the sound of sirens. She stumbled toward the door just as Daniel entered. It's okay, he said quickly. Just a hull drill. Nothing to worry about. Her eyes were wide. The sound. It's the same as our raid alarms. He nodded slowly. War leaves its echoes everywhere. He guided her back to the bed. For a moment, she held his hand tightly, her small fingers trembling. When you found me, she said, I thought death had come wearing a human face, but now I see life wears it too. Daniel didn't answer. Words felt too small for what she meant. A week later, Station received a coded transmission and envoy ship from the Viren Empire requesting medical and diplomatic contact. It was unheard of. The message referenced the human who saved one of ours. When the fleet commander heard, he ordered a private meeting. Hayes, he said, your actions may have started something bigger than you think. The Viren want to talk peace. Daniel was stunned. Because of her? Because of what she told them, the commander said. Apparently your medics oath did more than heal one girl. The envoy arrived days later, a sleek silver vessel marked with Viren symbols. The docking bay was filled with security, medics, and officers. Lyra stood beside Daniel, wearing a simple white tunic, her crutches gone. She walked slowly, but steadily. From the airlock emerged 3 Viren delegates, tall and graceful, their faces unreadable. When they saw Lyra, they froze. One of them stepped forward, his voice trembling. Lyra Vera. You are alive? She nodded. Because of him? She gestured to Daniel. He's not what they told us. None of them are. The delegates looked at Daniel with a mix of confusion and respect. The leader bowed slightly. Then perhaps we were wrong. Negotiations began soon after. Daniel was not part of the official talks, but everyone knew he was the reason they happened. Still, he stayed close to Lyra. She grew stronger each day. Learning more about humanity, their foods, their songs, their laughter. One evening, she asked Daniel to walk with her in the observation garden. The lights from the nearby nebula bathed everything in soft blue. My people used to believe mercy was weakness, she said. But you showed me it is the greatest strength. Daniel smiled. Mercy is harder than war, but it lasts longer. They stopped beside a pool of clear water that reflected the stars. Do you think our people will ever stop fighting? She asked. He looked out at the horizon of stars. Maybe not today. But someone has to take the first step. You did. She turned to him, eyes glistening. No, Daniel. You did, when you chose to save me. For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the station filled the silence. Weeks later, the first peace convoy departed toward Viren space, carrying envoys from both sides. Daniel watched from the hangar deck as the ships drifted into the distance. Lyra stood beside him, ready to return home as a symbol of hope. You sure you want to go? He asked. She smiled. My world needs to see that humans can heal as well as fight. Maybe then the war can truly end. He nodded slowly. Then go show them. She stepped closer, placing her hand over his. You changed everything, Daniel. You made me believe peace is possible. He felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't felt since before the war. Then promise me something, he said. When your people look up at the stars, tell them we're not their monsters. I promise. The shuttle doors closed. As the engines ignited, she looked through the window one last time. Their eyes met, a silent promise passing between them, hope shared across two worlds. That night, Daniel stood alone by the viewport. Outside, Earth's flagships floated beside Viren vessels, in tentative formation. It was fragile, uncertain, but it was a start. He whispered to the stars, maybe mercy really can change everything. And far away, on a world once filled with hate, an alien girl told her people the same thing. The space between the stars was calm again. Months had passed since Lyra returned to her homeworld as a messenger of peace. The Viren Empire had begun its first official talks with the Human Federation. Across both civilizations, the war that once defined generations started to tremble under the weight of something new. Hope Captain Daniel Hayes remained stationed on Orbital Station Helios, still serving as a medic but now carrying a new reputation. Soldiers who once whispered behind his back now saluted him with quiet respect. They called him the man who healed an enemy and healed a war. Even so, Daniel stayed humble. He worked in the medical wing every day, tending to soldiers, explorers, and colonists who came through the station. But sometimes late at night, when the halls were empty and only the hum of life support filled the silence, he found himself staring at the stars. Wondering where Lyra was now, one morning the intercom crackled to life. Incoming diplomatic vessel, Viren origin, Captain Hayes. Your presence is requested at Dock 2. Daniel paused mid-suture, setting aside his tools. He wiped his hands, unsure whether to feel excited or cautious. He walked through the corridors, the rhythmic sound of his boots echoing softly at Dock 2. The atmosphere shimmered with anticipation. Crew members lined the rails as the Viren ship's leak, and pale like polished silver glided into the bay. The airlock opened, and a familiar voice broke through the hiss of pressure seals. Daniel, she said. He turned on. There she was. Lyra stepped through the airlock. Walking without support now, her movements steady and graceful. She wore a pale uniform, marked with the sigil of both nations, the first ambassador of unity. Her smile was small, but filled with warmth. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. You walk better than most humans now, he said with a grin. She laughed softly. And you still look like you haven't slept in a month, he chuckled. Welcome back, Ambassador. Lyra, she corrected gently. Always just Lyra to you. They walked together through the corridors. Everywhere they went, humans stopped and stared. Some smiled, others simply watched, still unsure how to react. Peace was new, and new things always made people cautious as they entered the observation deck. Lyra looked out at the curve of Rithis below, its deserts glowing gold beneath the rising sun. My people are rebuilding, she said quietly. Cities that were dust now have light again. Children play outside without fear of the sky burning. That's good news, Daniel said. You gave them that hope. Lyra shook her head. You did. Without your kindness, none of this would exist. He turned toward her, serious now. It wasn't just me. It was both of us choosing not to hate. She smiled faintly. Then maybe hate can be unlearned. Later that day, a meeting was held in the station's central council room. Representatives from both species gathered around a large holographic table displaying sectors of shared space. Lyra stood beside the human commander, translating where needed, her voice calm and precise. For hours, they discussed trade routes, security zones, and resource treaties. Some humans remained wary. Some Viren questioned her loyalty. But every time tempers rose, Lyra's voice steadied the room. She spoke of what she saw in Daniel's mercy. How compassion had saved not only her body, but her faith in life itself. Daniel watched her, proud yet uneasy. He could see the strain behind her calm expression. Bridging to civilizations was heavier than any battlefield armor. After the session ended, she walked out quietly. Daniel followed her to the garden dome, where they could speak freely. "Long day, men," he said. "Too many old hearts afraid of change," she replied. "Peace scares them more than war." He nodded slowly. "War is simple. Peace takes courage." She turned toward him. "You always say things that make me think too much." "Hazard of being human," he said with a grin. Lyra looked down, fingers tracing the edge of a leaf. "Sometimes I forget we were enemies. Maybe because we stopped acting like it." For a moment, silence filled the air between them, but it was the kind of silence that felt peaceful, not heavy. That night, alarms sounded across the station. Daniel woke instantly. Red lights pulsed in the corridor. He rushed to the command deck where officers were already at their posts. "Report," he shouted. "Unknown vessel approaching fast from the shadow side," an ensign replied, not broadcasting any known code. Daniel's heart sank. The peace was still fragile. One mistake could shatter everything. The ship appeared on the main screen dark, angular, unmarked. It didn't respond to hails. "Shields up," the commander ordered. "Prepare interceptors." But before anyone could act, Lyra entered the room. "Wait," she said sharply. "That design, it's Viren, but old. A rogue faction. They don't follow the new council." Daniel turned to her. "Can they be reasoned with?" Her face was pale. "No, they believe peace is betrayal." The rogue ship fired. A beam of plasma grazed the station's outer hull, shaking the deck. Sparks flew. Alarms screamed. Daniel grabbed the console. "We need to defend, not destroy. Disable them if possible." Fighters launched from the station. Lyra watched the display, her eyes wide with fear. "My people," she whispered. "They will see this as proof humans can't be trusted again." Daniel touched her shoulder. "Then help me prove them wrong." She nodded, determination replacing fear. Minutes later, Daniel boarded a patrol shuttle with a small crew. Lyra insisted on coming, and though he protested, she refused to stay behind. "If they're Viren, maybe they'll listen to one of their own," she said. As the shuttle raced toward the rogue ship, the stars streaked past in thin white lines. Inside, tension filled the air. "You sure about this?" the pilot asked. "No," Daniel said. "But since when did that stop us?" They approached the enemy vessel, a battered war cruiser marked with scars from the old battles. Daniel opened a cum channel. "This is Captain Daniel Hayes of the Human Federation," he said firmly. "We don't want to fight." "Stand down." Static filled the speakers. Then a rough voice replied in Viren. Lyra leaned forward to translate. "They say peace is a lie. They say I'm a traitor." The rogue ship locked weapons. Daniel gritted his teeth. "Get ready to break formation on my mark." But before they could act, Lyra stood up, pulling off her headset. "Let me try." She switched the transmission channel and spoke in her native tongue, her voice strong and filled with conviction. Daniel couldn't understand every word, but he heard the emotion pleading. Honest, proud. For a moment, the rogue ship didn't respond. Then, unexpectedly, its engines dimmed. "There." Hesitating, Lyra said, surprised. "They're listening." Ganil exhaled slowly. "Keep talking," she continued, speaking of what she'd seen, how humans had risked their lives for her, how kindness had bridged hate. She told them mercy wasn't weakness. It was proof that both races could survive together. When she finished, silence filled the cum channel. Then the rogue ship's lights flickered and powered down its weapons. "They're surrendering," the pilot whispered. Daniel smiled faintly. "You did it?" Lyra shook her head. "No, we did." The ships returned to the station to the sound of cheers. No shots fired, no deaths, just understanding. It was the first joint victory of the fragile alliance. Later, in the quiet of the medbay, Daniel sat beside Lyra as she treated a cut on his arm. "You could have gotten yourself killed," he said softly. She smiled gently. "You humans always say that when someone does something brave." He laughed under his breath. "Maybe bravery just means caring when it's easier not to." She nodded. "Then we are both very brave." Their laughter faded into a comfortable silence. Through the window, the stars seemed a little closer than before. Weeks later, the Viren Council declared a ceasefire across all borders. Human and Viren fleets began joint patrols. For the first time in history, ships bearing both emblems traveled side by side. But Daniel knew peace was fragile. Hatred didn't vanish overnight. It had to be replaced with something stronger. He stood on the observation deck as the twin fleets formed a corridor of light through the dark void. Lyra joined him, standing quietly. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's a start," he replied. She looked at him. "Do you ever regret saving me?" He turned to her, his expression soft. "Not for a second. You reminded me why being human matters." Lyra's eyes shone faintly. "And you reminded me that mercy is not human or virant. It's something greater." They watched the ships drift toward the horizon, carrying diplomats, engineers, and doctors. The stars stretched endlessly before them, no longer symbols of war, but of possibility. That night, Daniel recorded his official report to the fleet archives. His voice was steady, but there was a quiet emotion behind it. "This is Captain Daniel Hayes. Mission update. Hostile encounter with rogue Viren, resolved peacefully. Ambassador Lyra Vera's actions prevented loss of life on both sides. Recommendation: continue joint peace operations. Humanity's greatest strength is not its weapons, but its will to protect." He ended the recording and looked out the window. In the distance, one small Viren shuttle drifted alongside a human carrier, its lights pulsing softly in rhythm. Lyra's words echoed in his mind. "Mercy lasts longer than war." He smiled to himself. "Let's see how long we can make it last." And somewhere far below, on the once-scarred surface of Rithus, children from both races played together under the same sun, proof that kindness could travel farther than any starship. The alliance between humans and Viren was no longer a rumor. It had become a living thing, fragile but growing. Trade routes were open again, science teams worked together, and soldiers who once pointed weapons at each other now shared coffee in the same halls. The war was not forgotten, but something new had begun. Captain Daniel Hayes remained stationed on Orbital Station Helios, now serving as peace coordinator for medical exchange missions. The station had changed too. Human and Viren engineers had built new wings together, blending designs metal mixed with living crystal, machines humming in both languages. Every morning, Daniel walked the observation deck to see the twin fleets, one human, one Viren, patrolling side by side. Each time it reminded him of how far they had come from the day he found a frightened girl trapped under rubble. That girl was now an ambassador, known across two civilizations. Lyra Vera's speeches were replayed on every world. She had become a symbol of hope, a voice that both sides trusted. Yet whenever she visited Helios, she was still just Lyra to Daniel. One quiet evening, the station lights dimmed to night cycle. Daniel sat in his office finishing reports when his communicator chimed. "Incoming call, Ambassador Lyra Vera." He smiled, answering immediately. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you again." Her holographic form flickered into view. She looked tired, but happy. "And I was wondering when you'd rest, Captain." "Rest is for diplomats," he said with a grin. "Not medics." Oh, she laughed softly. "Then I'll try to act diplomatic for both of us." Her expression turned serious. "Daniel, there's something happening. A Viren mining colony near the neutral zone has gone silent. My council fears sabotage." Daniel frowned. "By humans." "They don't know," she said. "But if it is, this peace could break before it even begins." He leaned forward. "Then we'll find out the truth together." She nodded. "I was hoping you'd say that." 2 days later, the human frigate Resolute departed for the neutral zone, carrying a small investigation team, half human, half Viren. Daniel served as mission lead. Lyra joined as cultural liaison, though he knew she was risking more than her title by coming. The journey took only a few hours, but the silence of the colony grew heavier the closer they came. The mining world, Viranthri, hung like a scarred marble in the dark. No lights, no beacons, no transmissions. As the ship entered orbit, Daniel gave the order. "Deploy Shuttle 1. Keep scanners wide. We don't know what's waiting. Lyra stood beside him, her expression calm but her hands slightly trembling. My people built this colony after the first ceasefire. There were families here, Daniel. Children. We'll find them, he promised. The shuttle descended through clouds of gray dust and landed near the main habitat dome. The doors opened to reveal a haunting stillness. No movement. No sounds. Only wind sweeping through empty corridors. They moved carefully through the settlement. Abandoned tools lay scattered. Holographic displays flickered weakly. A half-eaten meal still sat on a table, frozen in time. Lyra knelt beside a broken console. It looks like they left in a hurry. Daniel checked his scanner. No human signals. No life signs at all. But he frowned. There's radiation low level, artificial sabotage. She asked maybe, or maybe something else. As they explored deeper, they found signs of an explosion in the power core. The blast was contained but powerful enough to cut off all systems. Daniel examined the scorch marks. This wasn't an attack, he said finally. This was an accident. Lyra looked at him. How can you tell? He pointed to the melted fuses. If it were sabotage, there'd be evidence of external charges or weapon residue. This came from inside a reactor overload. She sighed in relief. Then we can tell both councils it wasn't humans. Daniel nodded. Yes, but first we need proof. As they worked to recover data logs, Lyra noticed something strange, a coded distress beacon hidden behind the main terminal. It was faint but still active. Daniel, she called. Someone tried to send a message before the explosion. He joined her, connecting his wrist pad to the terminal. The message decoded slowly, filled with static. A weak Viren voice echoed through the speakers. To anyone who hears, the reactor. Failing, not humans. Please don't. The transmission cut off. Daniel and Lyra exchanged glances. The truth was clear now. It was an accident, but if either side blamed the other before hearing this message, war could reignite instantly. Send this recording to both councils immediately, Daniel said. Lyra nodded, but before they could transmit. The ground shook violently. An explosion echoed outside. The shuttle's alarm blared. Incoming strike, detected a known origin. They ran to the viewport. Above the colony, 2 fleets had arrived. 1 human. 1 Viren, both misinformed and ready to fight. Commanders must have received partial reports. Daniel said, his voice tight. They think we were attacked. Lyra's face turned pale. They'll destroy each other. Daniel grabbed the comms panel. This is Captain Hayes. Cease fire. You're being manipulated. This was an accident. But the channels were jammed. Somewhere, someone didn't want peace to survive. Who would do this? Lyra whispered. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Anyone afraid of losing power when peace begins? He turned to her. We need to show them proof ourselves. How? She asked. He looked at the damaged tower nearby, the old communications array. We broadcast from their open frequency. Both fleets will see it. The wind howled as they climbed the ridge toward the tower. The sky above was filled with bright trails of fighter ships preparing for combat. Inside the tower, the control panel flickered weakly. Daniel worked fast, reconnecting circuits with his toolkit, while Lyra rerouted power from her wrist pad. Signal ready, she said breathlessly. Daniel hit transmit. The holographic display lit up, projecting their faces across the battlefield to both fleets. This is Captain Daniel Hayes of the Human Federation, he said firmly. Stand down. This colony was not attacked, it suffered a reactor malfunction. We have the data and the message to prove it. Lyra stepped beside him. To my people, she said in her own language, her voice strong, believe what you see. Peace is not betrayal. I stand here with a human who saved me, who saved our future. The fleets hesitated. The bright lines of charged weapons flickered out one by one. Then, slowly, both commanders confirmed visual receipt of the message. The battlefield fell silent. Lyra exhaled in relief, tears in her eyes. It worked. Daniel smiled faintly. For now, When they returned to the station, both were hailed as heroes again. The councils issued a joint statement, confirming peace was intact and thanking the investigation team for preventing catastrophic misunderstanding. But Daniel knew how close they had come to losing everything. One wrong move, one false order, and centuries of hate would have returned. That night, he stood alone on the observation deck, staring at the quiet stars. Lyra joined him, her steps light. "Still watching the sky?" she asked. "Always," he replied. "It reminds me that peace is like space, vast but fragile." She stood beside him. "I once feared the stars," she said softly. "Now I see them as bridges instead of battlefields." He turned to her. "That's because you built one," she smiled. "No, Daniel. We built it together." Weeks later, the new Human-Viren Joint Council convened on Helios. Daniel was invited to speak. The great hall was filled with both species leaders, scientists, soldiers, and children born after the war. When he stepped up to the podium, the crowd fell silent. "I was a soldier once," Daniel began. "I believed my duty was to protect humanity by defeating anyone who threatened it. But then I found one voice, a frightened girl who asked not to be hurt. That voice changed everything." He glanced toward Lyra, who sat in the front row. She smiled faintly, tears glimmering in her eyes. "Peace," Daniel continued, "doesn't come from treaties or weapons. It comes when one person decides to see another not as an enemy but as someone worth saving." The hall erupted in applause, the sound echoing across walls of glass and steel. For a moment, both races clapped in rhythm, united by something stronger than language. That evening, when the speeches ended, Daniel and Lyra walked quietly through the garden dome. Tiny flowers glowed under artificial light, a mix of earth and Viren plants sharing the same soil. "Your words move them," Lyra said softly. He smiled. "Maybe, but words fade unless actions follow." She nodded. "Then we keep acting." They stopped by the water's edge, where reflections of both of them shimmered side by side. "You know," Daniel said, "when I found you that day, I thought I was just doing my job. I never imagined it would change everything." Lyra looked at him, her eyes gentle. "Sometimes the smallest mercy becomes the greatest story." They stood together as the artificial sun dimmed, casting golden light over the garden. Somewhere in the distance, a group of children, half human, half Virent, laughed and chased each other near the trees. Daniel smiled quietly. "That's what peace sounds like." Lyra nodded. "Let's make sure it never fades." Years later, stories of the medic and the alien girl became legend across both worlds. Schools taught it as the beginning of the Great Reconciliation. Statues were built not of warriors holding weapons, but of a man kneeling beside a wounded girl, hand outstretched in compassion. Some said that moment had changed the destiny of two galaxies, and somewhere, on a peaceful world where humans and Viren lived side by side, a young child once asked his teacher, "Was the story real?" The teacher smiled. "Yes, it began with 7 simple words.